Greetings, I am Pastor Michael Jannett, Assistant to the Bishop for Formation and Communication in the Southeastern Synod. Greetings to you on behalf of Bishop Kevin Strickland and the entire Southeastern Synod staff. This Gospel reading and message is for the 24th Sunday after Pentecost. Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 25th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and he tells them this parable. For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability. And then he went away. The one who had received 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of the master. The one with 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have 2 more. The master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid. And I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent away from him, and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. In my role, part of what I do is work with our Synod youth and young adult ministries. Now, this is the time of year when we have the All Tennessee Lutheran Youth Gathering, which is happening on Saturday, November 4th, which, as this comes to you, would have been either yesterday or sometime in the past. Where youth across our state of Tennessee will gather together, or really invited, the whole Synod is invited to join us, to come together to learn about faith, to be equipped, to love and serve. Now, this is also the time of year when short-term recruiters from the Young Adults in Global Mission, also known as YAGM, travel around all the different synods, inviting 21 to 29-year-olds to consider becoming a part of the YAGM program. This is the time of year when our college students are looking forward to a Thanksgiving break and then kind of recharging as they go back to school for finals and essays. And for our high school students, this is the time for cross-country meets, for Friday night lights, for band members, cheerleaders, football players, and those getting ready for soccer and wrestling and baseball and track. Throughout their lives, our youth and young adults have met people like you, coaches, teachers, church members, friends, mentors, professors, bosses, pastors, deacons, Sunday school teachers. And I give thanks to God that you've been there for these young people, to help them, to be in relationship with them, to guide them, to train them, to nurture them, to feed them, to inspire them, to financially support them. I am one of those recipients, which is why I'm passionate about this call to serve alongside our youth and young adults. I cherish the relationships that were built around me and nurtured for my sake. And now I feel like I get to return that gift to others. But for you, for those relationships that you have formed with our young people across this synod, those relationships are deep and they are awesome. And we develop those in normal times, relative term. But these relationships have become especially important during this time of pandemic. Right? This pandemic has changed the way we do ministry, and it continues to impact our lives. Hospitals straining, and school teachers having to find new ways to teach, ways before unimagined. This time of year, I love to warm up to a cup of coffee. And for the students at Georgia Tech, they expect the same thing. Many of them love a nice warm cup of coffee, a mocha, a cappuccino. And normally, they can get that cup of coffee at no expense from Grace House, the campus ministry on the campus of Georgia Tech. But for safety reasons, they've had to shut down their coffee service. They've been forced to rethink campus ministry. Tusculum University in Greenville, Tennessee, has started to formulate a joint Episcopal Lutheran campus ministry. But instead of kicking off by throwing a pizza party or having an ice cream gathering, they gather via Zoom, and they're finding new and creative ways to gather around faith-forming materials, challenging discussions, again, virtually. Now, instead of our All-Tennessee Lutheran Youth Gathering happening at St. Timothy Lutheran Church in Hendersonville, Tennessee, which is just east of Nashville, we, on November 14th, would have held an online event. Right? These youth so look forward to gathering together, to seeing one another face to face. These stake gatherings are so important for our youth to realize that they're not alone down here in the South as Lutherans. They love hearing one another's stories. Now, I share these stories with you because for years and years we have done good ministry in this synod. We have gathered youth and young adults, and I think the fruit of those efforts can be found throughout our synod, as year after year, more and more of these youth and young adults sense God calling them into some kind of ministry, maybe as youth leaders or campus ministers or as volunteers in congregations and in their communities, maybe as deacons and pastors. Right? We pay such good attention to the youth and young adult ministries of this synod that it is no wonder that the Southeastern Synod has one of the highest number of candidates moving towards ordained ministry, right, to become pastors and deacons. Now, I share these stories with you, again, because this pandemic has had a major impact on how we do these ministries. In fact, the pandemic has forced us to ask ourselves not just what are we doing in youth and young adult ministries, and not just how are we approaching youth and young adult ministries, but this pandemic has forced us to ask ourselves, why are we paying so close attention to youth and young adult ministries? As we ask ourselves why we do what we do, not just as a synod, but you, out there in the pews, or maybe right now you're in your car or your living room, ask yourselves, why do you do the ministry that you do? You ask yourself, who have you been called? Why have you been called to ministry, to whatever that ministry looks like? And now I would point you to the parable that Jesus tells the disciples regarding the talents. So this wealthy landowner heads out of town, puts the servants in charge of the property, and specifically invites 3 of those servants to take care of some of the money. One gets 5 talents, one gets 2 talents, one gets 1 talent. Now, what does the one with 5 talents do? Well, they invest it, they trade it, and they come back with 5 more talents. The one with 2 talents does the same thing, comes back with 2 more talents. So they both double their money, if you will. The one with the 1 talent is afraid, nervous, buries the talent so that it's safe and secure and can be given back to the master upon return. Well, the owner of the land comes back after a while, praises the servants who had the 5 and the 2 talents. But that servant with the 1 talent, who risked nothing, was reprimanded, promised a not very fortunate future. But to the 5 and to the one with 2 talents, they know abundance. In the grand scheme of things, Jesus has entered in the midst of a time of wandering for the church. The church seems to have lost its way in the time of Jesus. The church has begun to see itself as an end in itself, as if being a God follower was something to be achieved for status or security. The church did not see itself as a means to carrying the gospel forth. The church had lost its way and started to treat the gospel as something to hold on to and protect, to bury itself into the ground rather than release it and become the gift of grace that it always was. Just like the servant who buried the 1 talent into the ground. Folks, Jesus lifts up the challenge this day and asks us, why are we called to be the church this day? What can the All Tennessee Lutheran Youth Gathering provide to today's youth? And how can they inform us as leaders? How are they being leaders in the church? What can campus ministry and young adult ministry look like in this new fashion, in this new way? This pandemic, as tragic as it is not the end of the church, but rather this is an invitation now to explore. Why are we the church? Some folks are doing a whole lot more these days, and some folks are doing a whole lot less. But the point isn't to measure the number of tasks you've completed, but it's to ask ourselves, what are we doing with this time that we have? How are we adapting to our circumstances? What are we doing with the gifts and talents that we do have? These questions and more point us not to shame, but to hope. Right? Psalm 90, the text for today, says, Lord, you have been our refuge from one generation to another. Before the mountains were brought forth, or the land and the earth were born, from age to age, you are God. In other words, pandemic or not, you are our God. You, God, will see us through. God is light. God is possibility. God nurtures us, right? To each of us is given a talent or 2 or 5, right? We're given Grace House, Tyson House in Knoxville, Tennessee, Emmaus House in Johnson City, Tennessee, and other campus ministries where our leaders have worked their tails off trying to figure out how to take those 5 talents and create outdoor office hours or socially distanced hikes or outdoor ice cream parties. Right, we have turned to our young adults in global mission for our synod into an online event where Olivia Slagle led an opportunity for us to learn about the YAGM program as we did it on Zoom, which we streamed to Facebook Live and got questions from Facebook. And the really neat thing is that in-person, what was normally an in-person event and a limited scope became all of a sudden something that we can reach to over 400 people online. Really neat thing about that YAGM night was there was a young lady who had checked in. She phoned into the meeting and she just happened to see that the Young Adult Global Mission Facebook Live turned on and she jumped on the call with us. She's an Episcopalian who did a Presbyterian YAGM equivalent program on our Lutheran night in the Southeastern Synod for Young Adults in Global Mission. You couldn't put that all together. You couldn't script it out. But what we did was we put those 5 talents we had out there into the world. And something great happened. The All Tennessee Lutheran Youth Gathering on November 14th shifted. It adapted. We took the talents we have, our church leaders, our youth, our musicians, and we just put it all out there into the world and created an event that spanned hundreds of miles, gathering youth from across East Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, West Tennessee, and in some cases across the rest of the Synod. All for the sake of the gospel. And in that kind of event, it is so difficult to imagine what that harvest will look like days, weeks, months, or years down the road. The young adult program leaders in the ELCA, especially Savannah Sullivan and several others, they have had one of the most far-reaching efforts for ELCA young adults by moving to online small group platforms in which, in the midst of this pandemic, literally hundreds of young adults across the ELCA have gathered together. Hundreds of young adults have gathered across the nation through these ELCA young adult small group programs. A program called Abide, which then spawned into another ministry for those high school, those seniors who are graduating high school, to gather together, specifically just that particular age group, in a ministry called Passage. Again, small group based, where folks who are graduating in the midst of this pandemic can find solace and care for one another. Folks, putting the gifts we have out into the world is not a have-to kind of thing, right? This is an invitation for you to use the gifts God's given you and to just put them out there into the world, right? Try, experiment, be safe as far as this pandemic is concerned, but see the current state of things as an opportunity for reimagining what it means to be the church. The church reimagined. The church called back to its roots to be a light to the world. Right? Jesus reminds us, even as we struggle in these days, that we can be about the work of renewing our purpose, of rediscovering grace, of getting out of our own way, so that the gospel might shine through. That grace and forgiveness and mercy remain at the forefront of our words and actions. Be well, friends. Breathe. Don't forget to breathe. And as fellow pastor Jay Gamlin once said, find gracious courage and send those gifts into the universe. Not because it will work, because it is what your soul cries out to do. Follow that call, my friends. Let your soul cry out. Amen.